Looking for magic cards? At flipsidegaming.com you can now use the promo code LVD to get a 10% discount on orders over $10 while supporting the channel at the same time. Hello and welcome to another Magic Arena gameplay video. Today we're taking a look at the mono-blue starter deck, Arcane Inventions. First off, we'll take a look at the deck list and play a game with the deck without making any changes to it out of the box. And then afterwards we'll take a look at the upgraded version of the deck and play a few games with the upgraded version too. So first off, let's take a look at Arcane Inventions, a mono-blue artifact-based deck. So let's take a look at the entire list here. At 1 mana we've got Gearsmith Prodigy, which can become a 2/2 if you control an artifact. We've got Disperse as a cheap bounce spell, Diamond Mare can gain a bit of life. Then we've got 4 Field Creepers, which is a pretty weak card, but it is an artifact and you need a critical mass of those for your artifact synergies. Then we've got 2 Aven Wind Mages, which is a bit out of place in this deck, but it is a 3 mana 2/2 flyer that can get in some evasive damage. We've got 3 Aviation Pioneers, a 3 mana 1/2 that makes a 1/1 flying Thopter token that's also an artifact. We've got a Befuddle as a combat trick, 1 Divination for card draw, Sai Master Thopterist, making additional Thopter tokens whenever we cast an artifact, so pretty powerful rare. And then we have Tempest Djinn as one of the payoff cards for being in a mono-blue deck, getting +1/+0 for each island we control, and otherwise a 4 toughness flyer. Then we've got Waterknot as removal, Arcane Encyclopedia as more card draw. Then moving on to the 4-drops, we've got 2 Scholar of Stars, which draws a card when it enters the battlefield if we control an artifact. 2 Gilded Sentinel, 4 mana for a 3/3 artifact creature, also pretty weak, but again need those artifacts. Then we've got Air Elemental, 5 mana for a 4/4 flyer. 2 Gearsmith Guardians, 5 mana 3/5 that gets +2/+0 as long as we control a blue creature. Then we've got a Riddlemaster Sphinx, 6 mana 5/5 flyer that bounces an opposing creature when it enters the battlefield. And then Zahid, a Djinn of the Lamp, 6 mana for a 5/6 flyer, but we can also pay 3 and a blue and tap an untapped artifact we control instead of paying Zahid's mana cost, so it comes down for just 4 mana if we can tap an artifact. And then last but not least, a Meteor Golem, 7 mana for a 3/3 that can destroy any target non-land permanent an opponent controls when it enters the battlefield. And then the mana base, very straightforward, 25 basic islands. Alright, so that's the deck. Now let's jump into a game and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the play, and this hand seems fine. We've got a Zahid plus artifact, so if we just draw 3rd and 4th land, we'll be able to cast a turn 4 Zahid, which is quite strong. And of course, if we draw the 3rd land, Divination will help us hit the 4th land drop. Turn 1 Adventurous Impulse. Let's see what they reveal. Reveals a Ranging Raptor, so maybe up against a dinosaur deck. I think we'll go with a Field Creeper here. Try and get 2 damage in before they play the Ranging Raptors. Opponent says go, land is good. An argument for playing Diamond Mare if we suspected our opponent was playing red and we didn't want our creature to die to an opposing shock, we could have played Diamond Mare to ensure that if we do hit our land drops we can still tap the Diamond Mare on turn 4 to play our Zahid. By playing Field Creeper, a shock could still kill it, but of course a Lightning Strike could kill both, same goes with Lava Coil, so I think getting in the 1 extra damage might be worth it. And speaking of worth it, I think it's worth it to Divination here, to draw 2, try and hit our land drop for Zahid, because turn 4 Zahid is probably the best way we have to win with this hand. Alright, opponent taps out for Ranging Raptors, get to play turn 4 Zahid, which the red-green deck is gonna struggle killing unless they manage to play 2 burn spells on it. And then next turn we can go Sai into Diamond Mare to make a Thopter, and making a Thopter a lot more valuable than gaining 1 life from Diamond Mare, so that's how we're gonna sequence it. So the attack with the Ranging Raptors we're not gonna block. And a Ripjaw Raptor too. Alright, so Savage Stomp on Ripjaw Raptor and Zahid would still not kill Zahid, so that's good. And while we drew the Tempest Djinn, the other powerful rare we have in our deck. So I think the play now is going to be play Tempest Djinn, keep up Disperse if our opponent does try and maybe let the Ripjaw Raptor fight to take out one of our creatures, we can just Disperse in response. So drawing our rares definitely helps. Otherwise, the mono-blue deck is a bit on the weak side. Opponent with a Reckless Rage instead of Savage Stomp. So unlike Savage Stomp, Disperse is not going to save our Tempest Djinn. We could Disperse our Tempest Djinn so we can replay it, but I think just bouncing the Ripjaw Raptor is fine, since that way our opponent doesn't get to draw a card from the Enrage trigger, and we set them back on tempo, which hopefully buys us enough time to win with Zahid. Opponent replays Ripjaw Raptor and gets in for 2. Alright, so losing the Tempest Djinn definitely sat back. A Reckless Rage a lot better in this situation than Savage Stomp would have been. But we're just gonna go Psy into Diamond Mare now, I think. Could also go with Aven Windmage. If we tag them with Zahid down to 8, then it's not like Aven Windmage is enough to kill them on the following turn alongside Zahid. So we might as well go with a value play of Psy into Diamond Mare. And choose blue, get in for 5, and hope that our opponent can't answer Zahid. If they do somehow kill Zahid, then our win condition is going to be Thopters from Psy or the Aven Windmage in the air to get those last few points in. Alright, the Raging Swordtooth is pretty good here, killing all the 1 toughness creatures we have and enabling Unrage for all the opponent's creatures. So if now our opponent has a Savage Stomp, they could take out Zahid as well, and we would be in quite a bit of trouble. So can we dodge Savage Stomp? We can, it's just a commune with dinosaurs. Alright, so we still have a shot here. Taking 6 is probably still okay. Pick up a Gearsmith Prodigy, so this turn we can go Sentinel plus Prodigy, or we could go Windmage plus Prodigy. So we're putting our opponent to 3 here. If we happen to draw a non-creature spell to trigger the Aven Windmage, that could be lethal by itself if they somehow deal with Zahid. So that could be a reason to go Windmage plus Prodigy. But of course if we play the Sentinel we get a Thopter, which is nice. And it's a better blocker for the following turn to make sure we don't die. So this one's close. I think we'll go with the Sentinel plus a Prodigy, as it's also a little bit more mana efficient. But of course the hope is that they can't kill Zahid. Savage Stomp on Swordtooth would still do it, or 2 burn spells, or maybe a big Banefire. That's going to be a dual shot to enable Enrage twice. Opponent gets to draw a card and search up a land. They probably should stack the triggers differently, because if our opponent searches up a land before drawing a card, they make it less likely that they would draw a land with the Enrage trigger from the Ripjaw Raptor. Just a small side note. Alright, a Raging Regisaur, so lots of big scary dinos, but it looks like Zahid's going to be able to cross the finish line here. Alright, sweet. Turn 4 Zahid, going the distance. Alright, now it's time to upgrade the deck, and today's episode is going to be a bit of a departure from previous upgrade guides, in that we're not going to go over all the changes step by step, just because the end result is so much different from the starter deck that it would be a bit pointless to go over all those gradual changes. But instead we still have a mono-blue artifact-based deck that is built around the Antiquities War, a 4-mana enchantment saga that on the first and second chapters lets us look at the top 5 cards of our library. We can reveal an artifact card from among those and put it into our hand, and the rest goes on the bottom. And then on the third chapter, artifacts we control become artifact creatures with base power and toughness 5/5 until end of turn. So that's how we're going to try and win the game, try and play an Antiquities War as soon as possible, and then play as many artifacts as we can, so we can win when we reach the third chapter and all our artifacts become 5/5s, so we can attack for one big lethal attack, and hopefully don't walk into a cellar wreckage. So that's the game plan of the deck, and since our main game plan revolves around 4 rares, it's a bit difficult to fit this into the typical upgrade guide style. Plus, if you run the numbers on the Antiquities War, you would need around 21 artifacts in your deck to be 90% likely to find an artifact when looking at the top 5 cards of your library, which I think is pretty important in this deck since you can't really afford to be missing with the Antiquities War all that often, since you do need that critical mass of artifacts so you can win with the third chapter. So that does significantly constrain how you can build a deck if you need around 21 artifacts, and of course you need to start with 4 Antiquities War in the deck, so that would make it very difficult to gradually introduce all these cards, since we kind of need the Antiquities War and all those artifacts all at once. That being said, I will still highlight the most important cards in the deck, in case you do like the end result and would like to build a deck yourself, but are maybe missing a few wild cards. So first off, let's take a look at the entire deck list, starting out with our 1-drops, where we have the full 4 copies of Artificer's Assistant, 1 mana for a 1/1 flyer that says whenever we cast a historic spell, scry 1, and by historic spells we mean artifacts, sagas like the Antiquities War, and legendaries include legendary creatures, planeswalkers, and legendary sorceries. And the good news in this deck is that every spell except for the Assistant itself counts as historic, so every spell we play lets us scry 1, which is very useful in this deck since we're looking for those missing combo pieces, which can either be lands if we're already holding Antiquities War but need to make sure we hit our land drops, or of course if we don't have the Antiquities War yet, it can help us find it. And if we already have the Antiquities War, it can maybe help us find more artifacts to fuel the third chapter, so we make sure we can have a lethal attack. So the Assistant is definitely very important in our list. Next up we get to our first artifact, 4 copies of Fountain of Renewal, 1 mana for an artifact that says at the beginning of your upkeep you gain 1 life, so it can slowly pad our life total, but the important part here is just that it's a 1 mana artifact that helps us win with the Antiquities War, and is also cheap to play, so we can quickly empty our hand of all those cheap artifacts to fill the board. And then for 3 mana we can also sacrifice a fountain to draw a card, which won't happen very often, but every now and then you might end up sacrificing the fountain to find more action. Then we've got 4 copies of Navigator's Compass, 1 mana for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield we gain 3 life, so similar to the fountain, just a cheap artifact to have that critical mass. And the 3 life we gain is also useful against opposing aggro decks, and then the other ability on the card's not too relevant. Then we've got 1 copy of Diamond Mare, one of the few remnants of the original deck list, just a cheap creature we can play early to help us play defense, maybe pad our life total a bit, and eventually turns into a 5/5. Then we've got the full 4 copies of Treasure Map. This is a pretty important card in the deck. 2 mana artifact, we can pay 1 mana, tap it to scry 1, and then put a counter on the treasure map, and after the third counter is put on it, we get to transform it into Treasure Cove, and we also get to generate 3 treasure tokens, which are artifacts that we can tap and sacrifice to make 1 color of any mana. And then Treasure Cove is a land that taps to add colorless, and we can also tap it and sacrifice one of those treasures to draw a card. So nice card advantage engine, but in this deck we're not going to be sacrificing those treasures very often, since we just want to have those 3 artifacts for the third chapter of Antiquities War. So that's what's so important about Treasure Map in this deck. It's an artifact that eventually turns into 3 artifacts to help us close out the game with the Antiquities War. Then we've got 4 copies of Voltaic Servant, 2 mana for a 1/3 that says at the beginning of your end step, untap target artifact. The ability is not too relevant, does have a little bit of synergy with Treasure Map, being able to tap Treasure Map on your main phase and then untap it end of turn with the Voltaic Servant, means that you might be able to transform Treasure Map a turn ahead of schedule, which could be useful. But otherwise, Voltaic Servant is essentially a 2 mana 1/3 creature with vigilance, since it can always untap itself. Then we've got 3 copies of Sai Master Thopterist, also one of the remnants of the original list, and very synergistic in a deck that has 21 artifacts that will trigger Sai, since of course some of the cards in the original list, despite generating artifacts like the Aviation Pioneer making a Thopter token, they didn't actually trigger Sai, because you need to cast an artifact before you get the Thopter token, and in this deck where we have 21 of those, Sai is quite powerful. Then we've got the full 4 copies of Powerstone Shard, which is actually pretty important in this deck and serves multiple functions. So it's a 3 mana artifact that taps to add 1 colorless for each artifact we control named Powerstone Shard. So at first it only generates 1 mana, but the more copies of Powerstone Shard we find, the more mana it will generate. And in a deck where we're playing 4 copies of the Antiquities War, it's not too difficult to assemble multiple Powerstone Shards, plus we also have all the card selection from Treasure Map and Artificer's Assistant, and once we do assemble multiple copies of Powerstone Shard, we can very easily dump our entire hand into play and make sure we have that critical mass of artifacts when the third chapter of Antiquities War hits. And then Powerstone Shard also curves nicely alongside Treasure Map. You can play turn 2 Treasure Map, turn 3 play Powerstone Shard, and tap the Powerstone Shard so you can still have that 1 mana to scry with Treasure Map. so that sequencing also works out pretty nicely. Then of course we've got the full 4 copies of the Antiquities War, which is the centerpiece of the deck. And then finally we've got 2 different Planeswalkers, and despite being quite powerful and synergistic in this deck, they are not essential to the deck's game plan, since you can still easily win without them, but they do offer you a nice alternate win condition, in case the opponent manages to answer Antiquities War with something like an Ixalan's Binding. So we've got 2 copies of Karn, Scion of Urza, 4 mana Planeswalker, and the mode we're going to use the most often in this deck is to just play Karn and right away -2, creating a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control, and of course it does also count itself. And in a deck where we have all these artifacts and cards like Treasure Map and Sai generating additional artifacts, you can kind of see how those construct tokens would get out of hand pretty quickly. And then of course the +1 and -1 abilities on Karn can also provide a bit of Karn advantage. And then finally we've got 2 copies of Tezzeret, Artifice Master, 5 mana for a 5 loyalty Planeswalker, the +1 ability making a 1/1 flying Thopter token, that's also an artifact. The 0 ability provides a bit of card advantage, drawing us a card, and if we control 3 or more artifacts, draws us 2 cards instead, which is going to be the case more often than not. And then the ultimate ability is also nice, but not really necessary. And then taking a look at our mana base, we've got 18 islands, which is also a departure from the original list where we had Tempest Djinn, but given that we don't need Tempest Djinn, we can afford to also play 4 copies of Zhalfirn Void, which lets us scry 1 when it enters the battlefield, so giving us even more card selection. And we also put in 2 copies of Arch of Vraska in those games where things drag out, maybe playing against a control deck. This can provide additional card advantage, since getting to the City's Blessing in this deck is not too difficult, but also not really an essential card in the deck, so this would be the last rare I would add to the deck if I didn't have a ton of wild cards to work with. So yeah, that's kind of the deck list, so pretty simple game plan, try and get Antiquities War in play, assemble as many artifacts as possible thanks to the card selection we get from Artificer's Assistant and Treasure Map, and then we have cards like Sai generating additional value, and potentially the Planeswalkers can take over the game as well. Alright, so that's the deck, now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the draw, and we've got a reasonable hand. We've got Antiquities War in our opener, which of course is pretty important. Only 2 lands, so we'll definitely be looking for additional lands with a scry on Treasure Map, but on the draw, definitely keepable. And it's always interesting whether to play the Compass on turn 1 or not. Sometimes you're holding a Sai, Master Thopterist, and you want to keep some of your artifacts. In this hand, it looks like we're going to be curving out most of the way, so I don't mind playing Compass on turn 1. In case that we don't have the mana to play it later, so we have it in play when we reach the 3rd chapter on the Antiquities War. Looks like we're up against maybe a blue-black, more controlling deck. It's definitely still going to run out the Treasure Map, hope it resolves. It does. So we'll put a stop on our upkeep here so we can scry before we draw, since now we did draw the land, so we no longer need to scry into lands, and we can afford to scry into spells instead. And then we still have the mana to play another Treasure Map afterwards. Alright, let's put that on the bottom. Take our draw step. And there's Sai, alright. So I will still run out the Treasure Map here. And then the turn after we play Antiquities War, we might be able to play Sai and a cheap artifact in the same turn, generating a Thopter token. Opponent with a Siren Reaver, so this could actually be the blue-black starter deck still. Or maybe a slightly modified version of it. Alright, so given that they tapped out, I think it's reasonable to just play the Antiquities War. Although we could also just scry with the Treasure Map and then play a Sai. One of the issues with playing the Antiquities War right now is that we wouldn't be able to transform the Treasure Map in time, because while we could flip the Treasure Map the turn the 3rd chapter of Antiquities War hits, the treasure tokens will still have summoning sickness once they turn into creatures. So I think it's okay to just play Sai instead here. Of course, drawing a second Antiquities War makes it less important to have those transformed treasures in time for the 3rd chapter. Opponent has Chupacabra, which we kind of expected them to have here, given that they were on the blue-black starter deck. So that could have also been a reason for us not to play Sai, but I don't actually think we need Sai here. So I think this is still fine. And do we want to land? I mean, Arch of Vraska is not bad, since that lets us play Antiquities and still scry with the Treasure Map. So I think we'll keep that one. And then we can take a draw step, play an Antiquities War, see what we draw, and then we might actually scry with the second treasure map here instead of the first one, since we will still be able to flip the first one, but we'll see. Since of course flipping the treasure map will generate additional mana thanks to the treasure cove next turn. So step 1, play Antiquities War. And find a Fountain of Renewal, which is also a nice cheap artifact we can play next turn. So let's pass a turn for now. I think we probably will just transform the first one. Opponent gets in for 7, but this is also where all the life gain from cards like Compass and Fountain come in handy. And our opponent does have a Hostage Taker, so if they now try and target the treasure map with 2 counters on it, we could transform it in response, but our opponent wisely targets the first one, so that's fine. Losing a treasure map definitely a setback, but I think we'll be able to manage without it. So they play the treasure map right away. One of the upsides, of course, of this deck is that you're pretty well set up against creature removal spells, since you only really have a ton of creatures on the 3rd chapter, and opponent can't really use their removal spells on your artifacts, but Hostage Taker is kind of the exception. So do we want to keep a Zephyrin Void? Don't think we need it. Since next turn we'll find an artifact, we'll be able to maybe play Karn minus, play a Fountain. Seems okay. Would rather find more cheap artifacts instead of lands here. Alright, Voltaic Servant. What do we find with Antiquities? I think we'll take another Fountain here. So we can go Karn, make a token, play 2 Fountains, or we can play Servant and play 2 Fountains. Also something interesting to note is that the construct tokens from Karn synergize nicely with the Antiquities, since the tokens are 0/0s as base power and toughness, and they get +1/+1 for each artifact we control. But with the Antiquities, they become 5/5s that still get +1/+1 for each artifact we control, so they actually get bigger instead of becoming 5/5s. I don't mind playing Karn here, even though it's gonna die to the Siren Reaver. Make that construct token. Hope the opponent's last card isn't another Chupacabra. And then just play 2 Fountains. And pass a turn. So our opponent's gonna have to keep back quite a few creatures to survive the 3rd chapter, but then we can just play another Antiquities War and do it once again. So they might still attack with a Siren Reaver here just to finish off Karn, but next turn we'll have 7 artifacts turning into 5/5s. So if they attack with a Reaver, they would be dead on the way back unless they have interaction. So let's see if they attack with a Reaver. They don't, so they don't have any interaction left in hand. They're going to be chum blocking with all creatures here. And then we're going to be able to follow up with another Antiquities. And we even drew the 3rd one. And then of course be able to minus Karn once again. So we'll do that first here. And then we might as well play another Antiquities. See what we can draw. And find Power Stone Shard, Fountain, and Compass. Shard would be nice if we had more mana available, but I think we'll go with a Compass right now. And then attack with everyone. See what our opponent wants to do. And I mean, despite our opponent playing one of the starter decks here, it's not like they had an unreasonable draw. They played a Chupacabra, which killed our Sai, which was a 2-for-1 in their favor. They played a Hostage Taker, stealing our treasure map, which was a 2-for-1 in their favor. But at the end of the day, Antiquities War just forces the opponent in a very difficult situation. Alright, interesting. They did have a Vraska's Contempt, which is a little strange because then they could have potentially killed Karn and still survived. Alright, so let's play Voltaic Servant, I guess, which can apply a bit more pressure to their life total. And then it doesn't really matter what we untap here, might as well untap a treasure, I guess. So next turn we'll find an artifact, we can play another antiquities, we can play a compass. So we might even have a lethal construct token here. Alright, instead another hostage taker, so opponent definitely putting up a good fight here. The token will get exiled, but opponent won't be able to replay it, but they're still facing the third chapter of antiquities, which is going to be hard to beat, and our opponent packs it in. Alright, sweet, on to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw with a solid opening hand, turn 1 assistant, turn 2 treasure map, and we already have the antiquities lined up. Turn 1 swamp. Alright. So this hand needs a 4th land, and maybe a card like Power Stone Shard would be nice. Opponent on green black. Alright, let's play our map. Get our scry with the assistant. We did find a 4th land, so don't need to keep additional lands on top. Another assistant. We're probably just going to play another map and scry with the original one. So we don't have time to play the other assistants. I think we bottomed that one. Would also rather find more artifacts to go alongside the antiquities instead of more non-artifacts. It looks like the first assistant might die here. To a vicious offering, fair enough. So on upkeep we can scry with the first treasure map. Bottom any additional lands we might find. Alright, and a turn 3 Slimefoot, so opponent on the black-green starter deck perhaps, who knows. We definitely seem to get matched against quite a few starter decks, but that's maybe because our deck doesn't contain a ton of standard staples outside maybe treasure map. So that means that we'll get matched against more of these beginner decks as well, which sometimes can be an advantage if you're just trying to do your daily quest. Diamond Mare's not terrible, but I think we can do better. Land 5 is still pretty useful, since that way we can play a 4-drop and still scry with one of our treasure maps in the same turn. So next turn is going to be interesting. We might play Karn, we might play Antiquities, but if we play Antiquities we might not get to transform our treasure maps in time. So I think we'll just take a normal draw step for now. Tazrad's not bad either. So I'm not opposed to just playing a Karn and minusing here. We'll get a 3/3 token. If our opponent makes a token and then kills our construct token, I guess Karn could die. But I think we want to wait a turn before we play the antiquities. We could of course also just start plussing, but I think getting the construct tokens worthwhile here. Helps us protect our life total if they can't deal with it right away. And Karn is really just a distraction here. It's not our main game plan, so even if they spend some resources killing Karn, that's fine by me. We'll put a stop on upkeep in case we want to scry. So opponent did not make a token end of turn there with Slimefoot. They could have just paid for mana to make a token there. So opponent probably should have had an additional token here, but if they can't deal with the construct token, that doesn't really matter. This implies that they have a fungal infection, so I don't think we'll block. So we will have to keep fungal infection in mind here. So I think we're okay to scry with the treasure map. Bottom additional lands, I think. Although land 6 would not be a disaster, since then we get to play Tazrat and still scry with the map. Alright, Power Stone Shards, not bad. I think we'll keep that. It's an artifact that the opponent can't easily interact with. That still generates additional mana, which we're interested in. So step 1, let's +1 with Karn. Alright, we're gonna get an island most likely. And then we'll play the island. And I think it's time to play Antiquities. And find another treasure map, seems good. Alright, so Karn's probably gonna die here, since we're not gonna block Slimefoot once again. But Construct Token can still block the opposing Saprolings just fine. So the drawback of the line where we play Antiquities here, of course, is that our Construct is not big enough to block Slimefoot through a fungal infection. So opponent sends both at Karn. will block the 1/1. Is your opponent not forced to use the Fungal Infection here, unless they've got 2 of them, I guess. Alright, it's going to be a costly plunder instead, sacking the 1/1 token, drawing 2 cards. Not bad. And Karn dies. So they've got 4 mana remaining. And a Sap Herd. The black-green tokens deck will definitely be able to survive the 3rd chapter of Antiquities here, since they can just make so many tokens to chum block with. So I don't expect the 3rd chapter to win as a game, but we'll try and make it count. So an upkeep will scry Transform Treasure Map. That's going to make the construct pretty big. And a Compass seems okay here. We've got plenty of card advantage already between all the treasure maps and the Tezzeret, that a cheap artifact is probably fine. So get to find an extra artifact. And another Power Stone Shard. Seems good too. So let's take it. Alright, so we could just play Tezzeret here, but I think I would rather go Power Stone Shard into Power Stone Shard. And then we can either play Compass and Scry with the map, or we can play another treasure map. I think we'll go Compass, Scry with map. So next turn, the 3rd chapter of Antiquities is going to be quite powerful. And we're going to be looking for an additional Antiquities. Sai is not bad either. Yeah, we'll keep Sai. It's no Antiquities, but we do have this treasure map that we're going to play. And at this point I'm okay attacking with the construct, since playing defense is not too important now that we don't have a planeswalker to protect. And getting rid of a chum blocker means that next turn they'll have 1 fewer chum blocker available. So next turn we'll have 8 artifacts turning into 5/5s. So given that our opponent's at 22, they don't need as many chum blockers, but they will still need to play defense here. Interesting. Well, they better have a plan to deal with the 3rd chapter here, since right now they would be taking lethal, and a single Fungal Infection doesn't do it. So, well, let's find out. Opponent might have miscalculated here. And yep, they just concede, so they shouldn't have attacked. But then of course they would be chum blocking with their creatures instead, which is also not a great prospect. Alright, we're on the play, and our opening hand's actually pretty bad. A lot of non-artifact cards, so the Double Assistant and Sai don't have a ton of artifacts for the Scry one and to make more Thopter tokens. That being said, the assistants do tend to find additional artifacts once they get going, so I think we'll still keep this one. Also being on the play, if we mulligan, that's gonna hurt us even more since we'll already be down a card. Alright, now that we drew a Fountain, we could actually go Assistant into Fountain, gets a Scry 1 twice, which will help us find more goodies. And a Compass is not too exciting here, but it is an artifact. How picky do we get? I think we'll keep it. We appear to be up against a green deck, so it's unlikely that Sai is gonna die on the spot, so we can go turn 3 Sai into turn 4 Diamond Mare plus Compass, make 2 Thopters, and get to scry a bunch more, which will help us find the more hard-hitting cards. Alright, it's gonna be a Merfolk deck. Turn 2 Deeproot Elite, so the life gain from the Compass could also be useful now. And yeah, the Sai is definitely not gonna die here against blue-green. So we'll get in for 2. We still get to scry here because of course Sai is legendary, so counts as historic, and there's the Antiquities War. Seems good enough here. We will still need to find a 4th land, but that's what we're gonna look for with the scries that we get next turn. Alright, so our hand's developing nicely. Let's see how powerful the opponent's draw is. And the assistants and the Thopter tokens might actually do some damage here, since they won't have many ways of blocking those. Alright, opponent with a Silvergill Adept revealing Seafloor Oracle. But they don't have any unblockable Merfolk in play at the moment. Alright, let's play a Diamond Mare. And Power Stone Shard does produce mana, but I think we'd rather just find a land here. Alright, perfect. Keep that on top. Name blue. But I will still happily play Navigator's Compass. We could have potentially played a Compass first if we wanted to play around the Spell Pierce. Play Compass and then play Diamond Mare. But I guess if they have a Spell Pierce, we would rather have them use it on a Compass than on an Antiquities War. Alright, let's get in for 2. And then next turn we get to play Antiquities, find more artifacts, scry a bunch more with the assistants, while getting in some evasive damage. No attacks from the opponent, since we've got too many blockers. And now we don't need to worry about any Spell Pierces. So let's just play Antiquities here. Scry some more. And I think we'll keep Servant on top. Like, there's a good chance we find a better artifact, but by keeping it on top we ensure that we find at least one artifact with the Antiquities trigger. And I don't think we need to be too picky in this spot. And alright, well, Voltaic Servant was the only artifact, so who knows what would have happened had we bottomed it. And then we'll get in for 4. So our opponent might be able to attack us on the way back, but we did gain quite a bit of life here in the meantime, so we're not too worried about taking a bit of damage. Something like Sleep at the right time could be pretty painful. But for now I think we'll be okay. And if our opponent draws a few extra cards, that's fine too. Alright, so to get in with everyone. No 1-mana pump spells outside of Might of the Masses we need to worry about. So we get to block the Silvergill, eat a Merfolk token, take 6, opponent gets to draw 2. I think that's okay. Get to untap. Zelfern Void the draw, and Antiquities misses. Alright, that's unlucky. Let's play Voltaic Servant. Make an extra Thopter with Sai, Power Stone Shard on top. I mean, at this point it's not too useful anymore. So I think we'll bottom it, since we would rather find more cards like Antiquities. Bottom another Power Stone Shard. Play Zelfern Void. Alright, I'll keep a treasure map. And we should try and get our opponent to 10 life, so that 2 5/5 artifacts are lethal next turn. So it's interesting how many creatures we attack with here, since if our opponent doesn't have a sleep, and we get to attack with a bunch of 5/5s, then as long as we get our opponent to 10, 2 5/5s will be lethal. But if they do have a sleep, we might as well get in a bit of extra damage here, so I think we will still attack with all the flyers. Hope to dodge a sleep. But even if they do have a sleep, we still get to attack with 2 5/5s. So do they have it? Nope, another Silvergill first. Could still mean that they can draw into it here. Or that they're not playing it quite yet. But yes, if these Thopter tokens turn into 5/5 creatures, our opponents will be dead, so it's pretty much sleep or bust. Alright, it's gonna be Merfolk Mistbinder, still quite strong, but not gonna be good enough here, since we're not taking a lethal damage and just need a few of our evasive creatures to connect. Alright, opponent's not attacking. And gain a life. Antiquities War happens. Can play another treasure map. But as long as we just attack with our flyers, our opponent's gonna be dead. Don't think they'll be playing any fogs. We would get to see the synergy between Servant and Treasure Map in action here, getting to scry twice. Let's just get in with the flyers. And that should be game. Alright, sweet. Normally sleep would not be such a concern since you would have more non-creature artifacts, but in this case we had mostly Thopters from Sai as our artifacts. Alright, so that rounds out our upgrade guide for today. A slightly different take on the upgrade guide than usual, but hopefully you still enjoyed this take on the mono-blue artifact theme from the starter deck, even though it was quite a bit different. But for now, I want to thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day. I also want to thank all my patrons for being part of the channel, and you can become a patron yourself today and decide the topic of future videos over at patreon.com/LegenVD.